September 9th, 2021, Longmont Housing and Human Services Advisory Board meeting. Do we have any public invited to be heard? Negative?
Nope.
No. Okay, next item on the agenda is to approve minutes from the August 12th meeting.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
All right, we got a second. All in favor? Passed unanimously. Item 4, review updated board application evaluations for 2022 HSA and updated allocation formulation. Eliberto, is that you?
It's going to be the Eliberto show tonight, and unfortunately, I get to hear my voice way too much. So yes, tonight we're gonna review. I want to caveat this conversation because it's really a place to start, but we really do need to get it as much approved tonight as possible as we go into this process. But the first thing we're going to go over is the new weighted, based on what I understood from board direction from our last meeting. And again, place to start, but we really do need to get some decisions made so that we can move forward. And so if you have other ideas, that's fine. We can hash it out tonight. We just want to land somewhere. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over the board application with the new weights based on what the board wanted to see in them. So give me 1 second while I do that. And I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Can everybody see that? And this is in draft form. So this is our proposed board evaluations. I also have staff that we can look at as well. So for you folks, this is not what you're going to use. It will be, I will import this into the EC Impact system, and it'll be an electronic version that you will see via EC Impact as you are assigned all of the different agencies to read. But it's basically based on this. It'll have this information on it. It'll just look different. It won't be a document. It'll be an actual interactive pop-up within the system. And I think, yeah, I'll reach out to those new folks that have not been able to sign on yet. I'll make sure that you all can do that. So this is the proposed evaluation. I'm going to go through it slowly. And here's some other things that, so on the first question, we talk about, we remove priorities because now the priorities are less weighted and more binary yes or no. If they're in the priority, they're a yes. If no, you're not even going to see the application, right? So Karen and I are going to do that screening for you. So now it's really about the prioritized activities, and the board wanted to use this as a way to weight an agency and how they receive funding. So I added a multiplier of 3 for this score, right? So I gave it more. This question has more weight than the other questions because that's the way I understood the board wanted. On the other hand, I did not hear anything about target population at our meeting. I guess it could be part of the equity piece and we could increase this weight, but I don't remember that from the minutes. So I just left that as 1. So it is not as much a weighted question as number 1. Same thing with best practices question. Now actually now I'm looking at it. Oh, so I guess I did put the weight on how it serves the target population, where the first one's really more about assessments, right? So maybe that's where I got the target population weight was, on the equity piece, right? How do they serve that population? How do they reach out Are they being equitable? Are they being inclusive in how they reach out to their target population? And stop me anytime you have questions. I'm just going to go through it. And there's not much more to go through. It's not a huge evaluation. Again, around program data, I didn't hear that in the meeting, but we could change that. Here is another big one. And that's in dealing with equity and dealing with historical inequities. The board felt that that was something they wanted to emphasize, right? So I gave that 3 points, right? So between 1 to 5 times 3. And so it changes the maximum score from 30 to 55. And then logic model, data collection, I didn't change. I can change. I'm just looking for guidance from the board. Did I hit the mark? Did I miss the mark? Are there suggestions? Because this will impact our allocation formula. Of course, Karen can also weigh in as well on this. I'm just getting it out there to see what the board thinks.
Thank you, Eliberto. Does anybody have any questions or comments about this? Brian?
Thanks, Graham. So I'm just looking at this historical inequities. What would be a way that an agency would score well on this?
Well, that's a great question, and I think we're gonna go through a couple of agencies in a minute because the board wanted to do that. But here's what I would say, and Karen, feel free to jump in. In my opinion, the way, if I was a board member and I was reading this, one, they would actually answer the question, right? They wouldn't just copy and paste, and they would talk about, you know, we know through whatever research they can find that people of color have not received this service or are underserved for whatever X reason, right? Our services are designed to ensure that they are inclusive, and here's how, right? So things like that is what I would look to. If I was a board member, those are the kind of answers I'd want to see there. That would make me want to score it higher. But if they give me a copy and paste answer of, you know, we serve people of color, but they don't talk about, you know, how they intend to make a difference in, you know, or don't acknowledge that there has been inequities, and that's an issue.
Got it. Thank you. That's helpful.
You know, I think the other thing is also, Eliberto, didn't we talk about if is the agency actually doing something? And if you said this and I missed it, I'm sorry. Is the agency planning to do something, or is the agency actually doing something?
So that is in our evaluation.
I know I heard it somewhere.
yes, that is, and we'll get to it here in a second.
Okay.
That is in our evaluation.
Okay, all right.
If I may add just on that, you know, one of the challenges in this particular area is that it's there's not necessarily a clear path of what to do. It's going to take time, I think, in some cases to evaluate that. So I'm certain we want it to be a focus of the agencies that we're working with, that they are making progress, they're thinking about it, they're having those discussions. and there's evidence that they're starting to make program changes or implementations that address those. I thought a lot about this question just because one thing that would be a negative outcome is if programs, because they struggle with understanding what to do or how to do it, they don't get funding, and then ultimately it's their clients who are losing out on the opportunity for those services, unless there's an alternative who's doing better, which is a little bit of a clearer case, like between these two agencies providing the same service, this one is clearly making that progress, this one isn't. So that's just something that's on my mind in terms of not wanting to throw the baby out with the bathwater, in terms of who the actual beneficiary is, to use perhaps I'll go with it. That's probably as good of a use of that saying as I'm familiar with.
I'll tack onto that and say that I think, for example, if you have a food pantry that's providing, food to a socioeconomic strata that is underserved, undervalued, underrepresented, that in the very nature of its activity addresses a historical inequity, but they may or may not have the the marketing skills to articulate some deep historical inequity that they're combating. They're just like, we're just giving food to people who are hungry, and so maybe we can just be conscious of the very activities can address these things and not necessarily how we talk about them. And we may or may not find organizations that are good about talking about those things because they're busy doing them as well.
And ultimately, I think, I gave an answer of what I would think. I think every board member is going to read these differently and think differently about them. I just think that this, in my mind, it's really about ensuring that that as a board, you are demonstrating your commitment to your values and your principles by weighting these. So, Chiquita.
Yes, I agree. I understand where both Brian and Graham are coming from, but at the same time, when do we hold those organizations accountable? How many years will it take before they get it? I totally get it, but the information is out there. So within these applications, we're asking these questions so they know that what we are looking for. So what happens next year if I get it. They're serving that community and that's important. But when do we eventually hold them accountable for making sure that the change is happening, right? So that's important to me, as well as serving the community. Is more to it, and that's why we ask these questions. That's why we're making sure they have a clear understanding as to why we're asking these questions. We want to make sure.
Karen?
So I guess I have two questions. One is do we have the weight? So I think we threw out, it seemed like it was an important, we've talked a lot about equity over the last year or so, and it seemed like it was a very important aspect that we wanted to evaluate. We're including questions about that. So in the proposal and in the evaluation. So you might be suggesting that we maybe not weighted a 3, but maybe weighted a 2 or 1. I think we still want to measure that, to Chiquita's point, but are you thinking that the weight should be a little less? And is there a different way to ask the question? Is there a different way to ask the question? So we just threw out some ideas and it, we would love to have some input in terms of either the weight or do we need to ask the question differently?
Brian?
Sorry about that. Thanks, Graham. Karen, I think that's a great question. So for me, it's more like I just want to be aware of, we don't know how these weights will impact applications. So one of the things that occurs to me is that we have a relatively kind of binary function. So you got to meet the minimum threshold to get any money. And then after that, there's some, one or two or three levels in which you may participate. When you have a 3x weight, that could, I guess, in a good way, if somebody's meeting that requirement, it would move them right to the top, and that's what we want. But I'm trying to balance this. So if they provide a really crappy service and they get a 1 on that end, but they understand or they answer the question well, so they get rated highly on historical inequities and they get a 15 on that end, is that the balance that we're looking for? And honestly, I don't know that we know until we try it. I don't have any good thoughts, but the question, I'm sorry, Karen, just the question's not an easy one. I mean, did the agency describe the historical inequities in its program is designed to address and the strategies utilized to address them? It's a, I don't want to say academic, but I think you got to be pretty damn insightful to be able to answer that in an articulate way. So I'm just not quite sure. Maybe it is a matter of how we ask the question. Thank you.
Aaron.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's great. If that question doesn't get it, and it's hard to answer, and it is academic, that might not be at all what we want to ask. So that's really why we're having this conversation. What is it that is important to know about the agencies when you're evaluating your investment in those agencies? And then just a reminder, I think, to the board is that, and I don't remember, Eliberto, when we did weighting in our evaluations for many years. I think maybe it was just 2 years ago that we took off the weights. And so it's something that if we're going to do weighting, we need to do it before we start evaluating the proposals. And it's really based on what you as an advisory board, unless you say all things are considered equal, when we're evaluating, that's fine. And we could take away the weight. But we added the weight because we took away some other kinds of scoring. And so, so it's really kind of, it's up to you in terms of, are there some things that are really more important that an agency gets right than others? And it generally all comes out in the wash. But it's based on what you think is the most important when you're evaluating an agency performance, their ability to provide a service to the community, and the importance and the value of that service to the community. So whatever you want us to do.
Kimberly and then Karen Phillips.
I think it's important to keep the historical inequities term, but I agree that maybe some more description would be helpful and clarifying for those who may not know exactly what that means, whether it's underserved, vulnerable populations, underrepresented. So I think there's value to the question, but it's also an opportunity to provide education for programs who may not have that level of awareness that you referenced, Brian. But I think that term, historical inequities, is still really important because that is the lens that we're looking through. We don't want to negate that. I guess I'm speaking for myself. I think that's important to keep.
Karen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the weighted thing is kind of redundant. You know, you can score 1 to 5. If they don't do it, you give them a 1. You know, I don't know why you'd want to add extra stuff to it. It's already complicated enough scoring 1 to 5, and then you're going to add weighted amounts. I mean, I don't get it. I think that's just kind of redundant personally, but.
Brian.
Thanks, Graham. Personally, I do like the idea of, if we know that something really matters, that we're going to give it a little bit of extra effort. Like it matters more than, you know, the strength of their financial statements, you know, addressing historical inequities. And I am sensitive to what Shakita was explaining and describing, which is that, you know, at some point we've got to do something. Like we got to stop talking about it. We got to stop acting like we're doing something. And we do need to hold people, agencies accountable for doing something. And there may be some, you know, effectively creative destruction that happens in that process, that it's going to be messy. It's not going to be perfect. And there's some tolerance of that we may need to allow, as long as we understand that that is going to be a potential outcome. Is in the imperfection, it's not going to be, you know, maybe exactly what we expected. I would probably favor, because there's both the historical equity question as well as the target. Well, no, actually, I take that back. I was thinking the target population as also being an equity question, but it's really not. So I was seeing that both of those are getting a priority, but the target population is just the target population. It's not meant to address underserved or underrepresented. It's just whatever the target is. Yeah, so personally, I'm game for trying it. I know what you're saying, Karen Roney, about, you know, if it needs fixing, this is the right time to fix it before we drive it down the road and get to the rest stop and we're like, oh shit, I wish I put air in that tire. But it's just that there is no known outcome here. And we do have a pretty good sense that it is absolutely important. So.
All righty. Thanks, everyone. Any further questions, comments, or input?
I have one. So would it be crazy just to have a question prior to that to ask, are there any historical inequities? You know, can you just ask that question first? So if they have them, then we can ask them to tell us what have they done about those historical inequities?
So,
Mhm.
so that would be fine for 2023 funding. But since it was due today,
Okay.
Yeah, the horse is way out of the barn on that one.
we could ask
But we
it.
could do it for next year.
Yeah.
And I think it's a brilliant suggestion, because it actually is a very direct question that brings the issue right to the surface. And if they say no, and there clearly are, then that is a good piece of information for us to have. And if they say yes, then they have to articulate it and then describe how they're addressing it. So somebody like that who made that suggestion should even consider running for public office. That was a good suggestion.
All right, so everybody likes the 3 multiplier?
Or can everybody live with it for this year? Or you know, I guess maybe it's not about like, but a live with. If you can't live with it, we can go back. But if you can live with it, then we can go forward.
I know. I'm so sorry. So my question is, you know, a lot of people have problems with the word inequity or equity, you know, so I think a lot of times people try to translated into equality. And so would that be an issue with them understanding what that term is? Can we put, well, probably not, I'm sorry. But I mean, I don't know. I understand what Kimberly was saying and Brian, everyone. It's just the more everyone is talking about it, the more I'm thinking about it with, you know, with the other boards and everything that I've been on. You know, a lot of people have an issue with understanding what equity is compared to equality. And so they may think, no, we don't have historical inequality towards the people we serve, you know, but that's not what we're asking. So I don't know. That's just a thought.
All right,
And it's a-
Eliberto, do you have what you need?
I think I do, for,
And beyond the equity question, maybe, because are there any, is there any other wording changes in the other questions in the evaluation or any other suggested weight changes?
yeah, I would stay at the weight. I mean, because the way the questions are worded right now, they are meant to be pretty connected to the application.
Right.
So, but I think the weights are fair game.
Do,
Karen
do
Phillips?
do the people know that are applying that they're gonna be, that question is gonna be weighted? So they're gonna emphasize that a little bit more, or no? They're not gonna know that. Okay.
They never have. I never did. When I was applying, I never know what Karen was looking at or what she, you know, I just wrote what we were working on.
Okay.
All right. So,
Mhm.
oh, Brian,
Eliberto, you're gonna send us to the application? Is that our
well,
next step?
you're gonna see it in, so now that with this direction, I'm gonna go into EC Impact and upload all this stuff and so yeah, I will do that.
Sorry, Brian.
Yeah, just real quick, the one place that that I'm not certain about is the 3x multiplier for board and staff demographics. What I'm not clear on is how important is having, for instance, staff demographics to the success of a program and its ability to serve the population that it is targeting. Because ultimately, I look at a successful program as one that does that. And the equity question higher up is really about, don't forget that there are other people that really could benefit from these services and exclude them because you're just used to not serving them. Like, you can't do that. But when it comes to staff, you know, I understand those are like, we culturally, that's something we need to do for every organization. But that's a lot of weight to put on. I don't know, like, I think about an organization that hires temporary seasonal, and you're just trying to get anybody to show up. You know, I don't know. It's really freaking hard to staff. That's what I was going to say. It's really hard to staff. So to really penalize somebody because the environment right now is really hard to find people of any demographic feels like a severe penalty to me. I'd go with a 2 times multiplier on that if I had my magic wand.
I'm just seeking direction. I'm fine with whatever you all think.
Kimberly.
I agree with Brian. I feel like it's important, but I think it's weighted too high based off of the intent of this process.
Did he just fly in there?
Nikita?
I also agree with
No.
Brian due to the
Oh,
employment climate right
yeah.
now.
Got spiders in the cupboard. This is the spider season.
But I guess we'll wait to
Yeah,
Polly.
sorry, that's kind of gross.
Hey, Polly,
Some
can
kind of
you?
bug in
Can't
my
hear you because our
drink
headphones
the
are
other
off.
day,
Oh,
too.
okay.
So can you mute her? Erica? Oh, here she comes.
Polly, can you mute or?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I thought I w-
we heard that interesting conversation.
My son
Spider
just
season.
found a bug. Yes. Sorry, I thought I was muted.
No, due to the employment situation all over the US right now, it's such a hard time for people to get employees, let alone trying to make sure you get someone that is representative of the community that you serve. So it's unfortunate at this time that that's the issue, but I do agree that that's weighted kind of high due to the circumstances at this time.
Karen?
So I would, let it be known that I'm channeling Madeline. So, usually, what we have seen historically in with agencies is that they do pretty well in terms of staffing. So usually it's there is pretty significant diversity among their staff members that are providing direct facing services to participants. It's usually the board, and this is really around again where Madeline would say, how many years are we going to hear the same answer from the same agencies? Is about, well, yeah, if you have a board member to refer to me, then do it. And so, one of the things that she implored with us with you and you as a board, us as staff, is that stop asking this question if it's not going to matter. And it probably was more on the diversity of the board that was more of an issue. So I'm just since Madeline isn't here, I really wanted to carry that voice forward because I've heard it from Madeline for as long as she's been on the advisory board. And so maybe if it's not a 3 or it's a 2 instead, I think that's fine. But historically, what we've seen with the agencies, it's usually around their board diversity. That is their challenge, not necessarily their staff diversity.
Deanna?
So Karen said much more artfully what I was thinking as well, which was that I think we've been talking about the staff demographics without really talking about the board demographics. And I do think the board demographics should be a 3, but maybe we knock it down to a 2 because it also encompasses staff demographics. I don't know. I mean, I know staffing is crazy right now, but the board demographics are really important. And there's a lot of agencies that have just been kicking this can down the road, giving us like canned responses about it's so hard, it's so hard, it's so hard. And I know it's hard, but you got to do the hard work. So I think I'd be okay with it too, but I definitely think it needs some extra weight.
So are we good with a 2?
I see a lot of head nods and
Okay.
thumbs ups, so it sounds
All
like it's a 2.
So the only caveat is when we go to the allocation formula, be aware it's going to change because this changes the allocation formula. This is going to change the ranges when we get to it. So, but totally fine with that. So are we? Oh,
And then the only other thing I wanted to ask if I could, because everything else on the staff evaluation is a 1. So I just wanted to see if there was any in terms of the agency financials, so have we missed anything? Is there anything from your perspective that you think has is more important to consider than others? We ended up keeping them all at the same level, but we can certainly change that.
Brian.
I have often wondered about the strategic goals. Have you found that there's a difference in performance for agencies that have like a nicely done strategic plan versus those who don't?
We would just love for an agency to answer that question correctly. It's in my opinion. So, you know, what we're really looking for here is, you know, is the agency staying on top of trends? Are they forecasting? Do they think strategically? And yeah, you bet the agencies that are looking at that and preparing for the future and paying attention to that data and information are much much better positioned, you know, to serve, if you will. But it's hard. Yeah. So I believe that, you know, that if you are, so we do like to look for, and we do see agencies that answer that well, and they tend to perform well because they are on top of it. They are thinking about the future. They are planning for it. And aren't as ill prepared when things happen that they didn't anticipate. So, but we usually don't get a very good answer to this question.
Karen Phillips.
Yeah, I hate to be stupid here, but on these weighted things, do you let the people know if they don't, you know, like to address the inequality issue, do you let the people know that they didn't quite get that right after they, you know, I mean, how, like Shakita said, you know, we want people to change, but if we don't let them know that that's what we need to have happen, then, you know, what's the point of having a weighted thing if they're not learning that you guys are, you know, dropping the ball on that area? Or
you know,
you're
Karen,
dropping the ball on the target?
I would say it's not necessarily about the weights. I mean, because it's just really about what are the areas where they fall, where they need to improve. So it could be about a weight.
But you let them know
if they
when they
ask
don't.
us.
Oh, only if they ask you.
You know, we've done this a variety of ways. You know, some years back earlier, we were careful about we provided input to each agency when we prepared the letter. We said, here were your strengths, here were your areas that you can improve. And that, you know, that didn't go over so well. We spent a lot of
learn though. How are people going to learn that?
We invite them.
Okay.
So we invite them. We say we said we would be glad to talk about your application, share information, you know, about your. So we do offer that. We just don't go ahead and plop it in there. But we do offer that for sure.
But my point is, how do you make changes if they don't, you know, if they're not addressing the inequality issue? You know, how is somebody going to change if we don't let them know that you're dropped the ball in that area and you're not doing it, you know? I mean, how do you change unless you let people know that that's not what's going on? I mean, I'm trying to understand this, and it's frustrating me because, you know, they're going to do this and then, you know, they're going to maybe not have it what they're supposed to, and they're never going to change because they don't know, you know. I mean, I just don't understand that.
Are you just talking about the inequities area or all of the areas?
All of the weighted stuff, you know, I mean.
But with the inequity piece that we score, I think that we have two opportunities to get them feedback. One would be in the comment section in the scoring software. We can type in, hey, you're talking about equality, not equity, or hey, this is where you're missing a point. And then secondly, in the hearing, when we see them in person, you know, ideally we will have reviewed their application prior to that, and then we can speak with them in person and conversationally, hey, you know, I think you missed the mark on strategic planning or in equity, and then it can be an open conversation. That's my input. But Brian, go
cool.
ahead.
I got it.
I'm curious on the staff scores, Karen and Eliberto. Are there any of these that you feel because of COVID, you will evaluate differently? And like reserves is certainly one of those areas where I imagine most agencies are going to be impacted, but there might be others. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, that's where I would look. I would look at number 3 and number 2 on that second session around financial stability, and then reserves are huge in this time. And I could weight those differently. I could make them a 2, no problem. But I think the only challenge about reserves is that I know a lot of folks had to dip into them, right? So I'm a little wary of weighting it too much because it was an issue of COVID and they had to dip into them. So I'd be wary about weighting that too much, but I'm going to look at it for sure.
Yeah, my concern, Eliberto, is that we don't overemphasize those areas where reserves did the job they were intended to do and got the agency through a difficult time, but now they've got to rebuild.
Right.
So I'd hate to see them penalized for having low reserves.
Right, because that's what the reserves are for.
Right.
Yeah,
Right, exactly.
for sure.
But I would say I would be looking for, and some agencies do really good about a plan on how to rebuild the reserves, right? So if they were to tell me, we're going to take 5% of this year's net revenue, and I'd love to see that. That for me is like, okay, this agency is thinking about how to rebuild what they have built in the past. That would be a 5 for me. When they're specific about how they're gonna replenish. Not if they don't, I mean, it'd be great if they still have the 3 months, but if they don't, that's fine. But do you have a plan to rebuild that? So I will change the hours down to a 2, and that's going to change the formula. So, but I'm still going to show you the formula, and then we can talk about that. But I'm just going to ask: Are we good now with the application evaluation? Because from this, I'm going to put that into the EC impact, and that is be how you evaluate the agencies. Okay. All right. Oh, wait, Kimberly has a question.
I just had one quick question about number 4 and where it says agency is financially sound. I think the question of how the impact of the funds on the agency's ability to provide the program is significant, because that I think helps prioritize a little bit how the funds are distributed. And I don't know if that warrants waiting a little bit more, because if we know the impact of the funding is going to be greater on the program's level of success, I would want that to be weighted higher. But I'm curious what others think, if that's warranted or not. That's what stood out for me in terms of number 4.
So number 4 is around % of funding.
Brian, did you have your hand up?
I did, and then I quickly put it down because I wasn't quite sure how to think about this. But I'm curious on number 4. Are you looking for a lower % of city funding relative to the overall budget? Okay.
I am. I'm not sure about Karen.
I think there's a couple of, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, maybe I'm not understanding the question, like the intent behind it. So that's helpful to kind of clarify how we're viewing this question.
Whoopsie, sorry. So I would say there are multiple things that we are considering here. So that go into the rating that we make. So is the agency asking for okay, I'm making this up, $50,000 and they're going to serve 10 Longmont residents. All right. That's probably a lot of money for a very small number of people being served. Also, what is considered there is the amount of money they get from the city of Longmont. Is it a significant portion of their, of their budget? So if Longmont's investment is 50% of their budget, that's pretty high. They're relying on, one source. Also, to the contrary, some of the things like if the city of Longmont's investment is 0.01% of their budget, then what the advisory boards have kind of said in the past, does it really matter, right? So if we are funding I don't know, a $10 million agency, their operating budget is $10 million, and they ask for 5,000 from the city of Longmont, and that percentage is very minimal, then some of the is like, does that really, doesn't matter, whereas to another agency, that $5,000 investment, might make a significant difference on their ability to provide that service. So those are all the dimensions that we think about when we score that particular question. I don't know.
To
And
me,
I will. Go ahead, Kimberly.
it just seems like there's two different things in this one area that might make it tricky to score, but that, I think maybe it's a synthesis, an average of those two questions. And if I'm understanding it correctly, there's no clear way of identifying if a high number or a low number for their funding is a benefit. We just have to interpret that based off of the information.
Yeah, for example, what Karen just said, I look at those things too. However, having run the program that I've run in the past, I know, so for me, it's like, if you're asking for a higher amount, but your impact goes a mile deep, right? An inch wide, but a mile deep, then I may still score you higher, right? If I know that program, or it'll make a bigger difference, then I would still probably score you a little higher, and then I would rely more on what percentage of the ask is, right? Because I still believe in question number one about diversification is super important in nonprofit funding, right? And if 50% is coming from us, that's not very diversified in my opinion. So it just depends for me, it depends a lot on the program too.
Thank you for explaining. Then just leave, I think one is fine. It helps me just to understand a little bit more around that question.
And the other thing that I would say is that we typically write comments in the comment section to explain, for the very reason you talked about, to explain if there's a concern, why that is. So kind of because of your point.
Thank you. Sorry to delay us in moving on.
All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing this. The next thing I'm gonna share is the actual matrix and formula. So we can look at that. And again, it's gonna change because we changed it. I'll go back and look at the notes and update it. But I wanted you all to see, so that you'll see what the matrix looks like for those new board members. All right. Can everybody see it? Or did not share? Oh, all right. All right, can everybody see it?
There it is.
So just want to really quickly go over this and then we can ask questions. These are last year's applicants. There's a whole bunch. Sorry, I went too fast there. And the columns are, of course, their agency, their program name, the impact area. So the big change this year is there is no weighted column. for priority area, it's binary. It's either yes or no. And actually, Karen and I had a conversation of you guys even have to see that, because the reality is if it's a no, they won't be there. I left it on this time because I wanted to show you that there is a no, right? Right here, this program was about volunteers and how to support volunteer connection, and it really wasn't in any priority area, so it was a no and did not receive funding this year. Then I will if they applied and received, they will see their what their award was from 2021, what their request is, and then you will see the average board score. So I take, Erica's going to help me this year. We're going to take all of your scores, average them out, and you'll see just an average of what you all scored each agency. Then we have Karen and mine, average score. And then the total score, we don't have to worry about weights, because the weights are in the score now. That's what we were just doing right now. So we'll get a total score, and depending on what that total score is, I'm going to scroll down here to the formula. So here's the highest they can get. If they scored perfectly between all of us, and nobody ever does, then their total score is 110. If they get a perfect board, perfect staff score. And then I went down by 5. Again, place to start. We can be more lenient. Last year we had a whole bunch of robust conversation of, is this the right number? So this right now, that's the range. And I forget what the average score is. I didn't do that this year. I said I went down by 5. But if they score between 100 and 110, they will get full marks, and they will get 100% of their ask. Then I went lower, and you'll see, those are the numbers. Of course, 99 is not there, so that's an issue. Yeah, figure that out. But it's going to change anyway. It's going to change anyway. How does it not equal to 99? That's weird. All right, well, I got to figure that out. But I will. And 87 is missing too. I'll have to figure that out. But more than anything is, those are the ranges. I thought I had fixed it, but apparently I didn't. But those are the ranges right now that we have. And I guess the question for the board is, are these the right ranges? Do you want more leniency? Do you want it to be tighter? I think one time I did it where you could only get 100% if you got 100% score, and the board was like, well, no, nobody's ever going to do that. So, yeah, I think we called it trying to find the Goldilocks piece last year, and that was a challenge. So, yeah, that's where we are now, just trying to figure out what's the range. Do you feel that 5 is enough, or do you want it more lenient? And then I can make the changes.
Brian.
Eliberto, do you recall how many agencies didn't hit the minimum threshold last year, or even just typically?
Very few. I mean, we funded most of the agencies.
Yeah.
There's a few, and there was a few that were that were really close and didn't get it, that the board struggled with. But the reality is, out of the 40 applications that we had last year for 40 programs that applied, we funded 32 of them. So 8 didn't get funded, I think is the right number.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So a great majority of them do get funded at some level.
Liberto, do you weight board score averages less than staff score averages?
No, and now it's 50-50, really.
Mm-hmm. And the board's clearly softer than staff.
Well, no, that's because of how many questions we have. It's not about, it has nothing to do with, it's you guys have more questions than we do.
I see. Okay.
And so you have an opportunity to give more points than we do. But I will say, what I've noticed over the last 3 years on average, yeah, board tends to score a lot higher than staff.
I think this looks good.
All right. Okay. So and I will change it up, and by the time you guys see it again, it will have the right ranges, because I'm going to change up so the staff is going lower because we went from a 3 to a 2, but I'll make sure that all the numbers are covered. I'm not sure how that happened. But I will work on that. But 5 is kind of the night feels okay. So, all right. So you have chosen this is going to be, we do this now because this makes it, what I've always told the board is this makes it formulaic. In other words, our funding allocation process removes as much or a little bit, I mean, the human factor really comes in your scoring, but this puts us above, it's not, I've been on grant committees where somebody will argue that feral cats needs to be funded, right? And they will argue it feels like a filibuster and they get funded. This allows us to say, hey, this is our formula, and we're gonna use this one to determine our levels of funding. So it makes it a formulaic process. All right, and that's done with that. I think we can go on to the fun part of the agenda, I think. And that's going to be, Karen and I picked some applications to go over, and we're gonna go over them together. I just gotta find them. Let's start with VIA, and then we'll go. So VIA application was kind of middle of the road. And then the next one that we're going to do was really the highest score of all of the applications that we had last year. So I'm going to share the VIA application now. And so this is not how it's going to look when this is I downloaded it. So it's going to look differently on your EC impact, and you're going to have more maneuverability to move between the application. But these are all the same sections. Everything's there. It's just in a PDF format, not the actual EC impact format. So here, I'll go quickly through the staff piece. I mean, this is where Karen and I do a lot of our stuff is on the agency piece. So for example, right here, we're asking for your strategic goals. I think I scored them low because they talk about their programs. I don't see a single strategic goal in this statement. It's just really, here's what we do. And that's fine, because that's part of the question, primary purpose and functions. But they have quite a bit of characters that they could have used. They could have thrown in some, we want to increase funding by diversifying our routes or whatever. So stuff like that. Here is of course, you've all seen. So here's some of their describing what their plans are. I forget how we scored them on this, Karen. You can jump in.
Well, I think so I think this is an area. So if you look at so if you look at the race and ethnicity of table for them, if you scroll down, so this is an example of what we were just talking about in the previous conversation. So you look at their board diversity, and like not so much, like, well, I'll just say not so much. And yet you look at their staff diversity, and, you know, and I think that they have a, you know, they had 50 of their, you know, 300 staff that speak Spanish. So, I mean, they've done a pretty good job of their public facing staffing, but not necessarily of their board. And so, I'll just be, so I scored them. I didn't score them a 1 because they did well on the staff end of things, but I scored them as a 2 out of 5 because really of their board, their total lack of board diversity. So that's an area where this plays out.
And now with the weight, that'll be much more important because 2 times 2 is only 4, whereas, you know, 5 times 2 is 10. So it's a huge, it becomes a big issue.
Right.
Yeah, so here's the language spoken. So I'm just gonna go through this. Also, here's sort of where we look at the agency budget. So when we look about diversification, you know, I look at where they're, I mean, they get a $3 million federal grant. That's a huge amount. They get quite a bit of funding from cities in the county. They get 300, you know, a little over 306,000, 305,000 from foundations. And they only get 200. So for me, this would be a little low because, I mean, that's a pretty big, but 200 grand is still pretty good. But I do like that they have earned income. Me personally, I always love earned income when it comes to nonprofits. You know, I don't know about Karen, but that's always an important thing because I think that helps sustainability. So 10% of their income comes from earned income. You know, I wish it was higher, but it's still pretty good.
Yeah, and I think what I would say in terms of, again, in terms of this particular application, to Eliberto's point, I mean, there is a lot of government funding that goes into transportation services. It's a costly service to run and operate. But I think that they, and you look at their program revenue, their program service fee. So they don't get a lot of money from their riders, but they, you know, but they do ask for riders to participate as much as they can. And the thing that I think is because VIA usually scores pretty strong for me, and that earned income contract is a big darn deal. They lost some of their contracts, like in 2019. But that's really how they subsidize what they call their mission-based program. So they would run, they would be a contractor with RTD to run some of RTD's, you know, programs, and they get, you know, administrative fee, and they would get some profit off of that, and they would reinvest that into their mission-based services that, you know, that need subsidizing. So that is, that's been a really good, a strength, I think, of VIA's business model. And I think the one thing that they also are, that they're really doing under this particular executive director is really looking for different ways of getting revenues in beyond going to the government trough all the time. So, I mean, we would hear, you know, the city of Longmont's got to give us 20% more funding or 30% more funding. And there just wasn't that much funding to provide, because they get a lion's share of their city money comes from our transportation budget, not from our human services budget. So, so they have continued to strengthen their diversification of their funding. Because if they're going to continue to serve, they can't continue just to ask governments to give them more money when it's just not, it just isn't there.
Yeah. And you can see, I mean, I'm a little curious about why you don't have reserve policy, but they got $5 million in reserves. So that's basically a whole annual budget in reserves. So, and then comes this is when the board starts answering, this is when the board starts your application evaluation. This is the community-wide question. It's really about what are they trying to address? And then here's the historical inequities question. So they sort of address it by saying they're bilingual. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know how the board score this. Love to get some feedback from the board. Does it answer the question, or is it a cut and paste thing?
Brian.
I agree that the bilingual is it hints, but it doesn't clearly. What's missing is the statement of what the historical inequity is, and I think it's a good example of how difficult that question can be to answer, because I don't know if VIA knows how to assess whether, for instance, the services have been difficult to access for communities of color, because they don't really live in communities of color. They're not operating in that community. So I don't know to what extent their ridership represents the overall demographics of the area. And that's where I think that idea that Shakita had for the next round would be good, just to get their read on, we're not experiencing historical inequities as evidenced by the representations, consistent with our community's demographics, whatever it is.
Right, so that would be helpful next year to help them answer this question better.
Yeah, and I get it's next year, but next year is better than no year.
Yeah. All right, and so then we get into, again, the target population, about who they want to target, and I'm trying to remember what the board question is on that.
So I'm just, because I'm looking at because these are basically the same questions as we've used in the past, right?
Right, it hasn't changed.
Yeah. So I think for the board, because this is really to be more, interactive. So this is really the question about how does the agency reach and serve its target population. And so, what, I guess that's the question for the board members that were here last year, and that scored the VIA application, or how would you, when you read their target population, how would you rate them for how they clearly reach and serve their target population?
Is that, here it is.
Brian.
Oh, when it's interesting to go through this process, because when I read this, the thing that I'm missing is probably that really clear statement of who is our target population. And then that follow-up that is, this is how we serve them, and this is the metric that shows that we're serving them. So in this particular case, I feel like it's that the target population has been kind of addressed in other areas. When they talk about the agency goals, because hell, I don't even know where I am anymore. There we go. So it says VIA provides about 3,000 individuals with about 100,000 accessible trips. Okay, so that's a number, but we don't know who they are. And then they say 88% of the, so then they do go into the demographics, which sounds right, assuming that that's who VIA intended to serve. That's the only disconnect I have. It seems intuitive that yes, that is who they intended to serve, but there's not that clear statement. So, but nonetheless, I mean, knowing that it is somewhat intuitive and discussed in the agency, I'd probably give them a 4 out of 5 on this.
Really?
And just as a side note, they do a really good job of addressing historical inequities for seniors and those with disabilities. So that question is answered, but it's just not answered in the same spot where the question was asked. But they do an excellent job of establishing that. That does take some searching to find the answers to these questions.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the best way to go is to actually go through the questions and take you to the location, right? Maybe that's the way I should have done it in the beginning. So Karen, that was question number 4.
4 on the evaluation, yeah.
Yeah. So question number 2 is, does the agency perform satisfactory assessments? Right? And that's right here.
Mm-hmm.
Shakita?
I just want to say that when I first got on this board, I had no clue what the world I was doing. But after being on here, and learning more, the insight is amazing. And I mean, not to say I've never been on boards or anything, I'm still on boards, but just this process, being a community trust, all of those things. But this process have been very eye-opening. And I guess I'm speaking to the new board members and everything, but it's so you would get it. And it just took me a year to get it. I guess I'm the dumb one. But I mean, I'm learning more and more. And this is helping me so next year I will figure it out and be like, no, like I said, those questions last year, I was like, let's just get through it, right? I'm just being honest, but it's just, I appreciate you all, the staff and everything, for having patience with me. I can't speak for everyone else, except for Brian. So thank you for having patience with Brian and myself. So I really appreciate you having the patience, and I'm learning more and more about this process and how important it is that we ask the correct questions.
Right.
So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. And we can change them up next year, right? For sure. I think we're going through this. So yeah, so this question number 2 is really about, do they do any type of assessments? And what I see here is, they themselves don't, but they look at a pretty intensive assessment. I know, Boulder County does do a needs assessment. So they're looking at least they're looking at some community data to determine their services. And they probably, I wish they would say that that they also look at their own surveys or whatever. I mean, that's what I would add here, but so.
Deanna?
I was just going to add on a little bit to what Chiquita said too, in that I just pulled up, I kept really a lot of notes when we did our interviews because I didn't have any clue what I was doing. So I pulled up the notes that I saved, but I can see that we had asked some follow-up questions to clarify some of these things that I think were not entirely clear from the application. So those interviews can be a great way to supplement and augment what they may be not artfully articulating in their applications. Like we did talk about board makeup and the diversity of the board and their target populations and some of the ways that they were really serving those target populations. So just especially I think for the new members, those interviews are really invaluable for helping figure out how you're going to rate these agencies.
Brian?
I think I've always struggled with this needs assessment question because needs assessments are really expensive if they're going to be meaningful and accurate. And when I think of what the city of Longmont spends on its needs assessment, which is obviously large in scope, but it's the same scope that many of these agencies have. So I always found it, if they could reference good, credible material, I always gave them a good score because it indicated that they did their research. And I think the point of this question for me has always kind of been like, to put it in plain language, like, did you just kind of think this was cool if you could do this program and didn't actually ask if anybody needed it? Or did you actually do the research to see if in fact it was needed? So I've always been relatively generous if people do use other documented and researched material.
Yeah, I think that's that's a great point because, it wasn't until basically 5 years ago that we as the advisory board and as the city invested money into doing our own needs assessment. Where we collected primary data. So for many, many years, 20, 30 years before that, we really did use secondary data that was available. So we would capture what other, we look at census information, we would capture what was done in the consolidated plan. We would look at, Mile High United Way or Foothills United Way used to do needs assessment. So I think to Brian's point, because it does require a lot of investment and effort to conduct a needs assessment. So whatever agencies can grab and use that helps to inform their service and their plan is, it's just as valuable as primary data collection. But I think we want to see, to Brian's point, that they did do some investigation and some assessment of the needs and what those needs are out there and how they're going to serve them.
Then question 3, since we're right here anyway, question 3 is about, for you all, does the agency provide sufficient evidence to demonstrate alignment with the best practice models? And we ask that. What evidence do you have that this is effective? How, for the population? How do you know it's like to achieve its goal? So there you go, Brian.
So
Go ahead, Karen.
No. So I was just going to go ahead, Brian, because I was going to say, so from the board, how would you, when you had a chance to read that, how would you score this particular question about best practice models? And Brian might have the answer.
I have no answers. So this is good evidence of just how difficult this evaluation process can be, at least in my mind, because the question I always have is, what best practice models are available out there? Is there documentation? Is there research? And if somebody has an innovative program, the answer is no. There isn't research, there isn't documentation because it's new. And one of the struggles we have is well, it's a struggle the agencies have as well, as being able to afford their own evaluation, much less establishing kind of benchmarks for best practices. So I always try to look for, any kind of research they find that of like the CDC or whoever it is that indicates that these kinds of things work, or of their own evaluations saying, we've moved the dial from a 65% success rate to an 85% success rate. I feel like in so many of the agencies, and having one, I know this, that we often measure need by the number of people who line up for the service, and success by the fact that they actually, got something. Don't use that against my agency when you evaluate it. It's I realize it's a little more than that, but
You're losing points all the time, Brian. I'm just saying. They're making notes.
the staff is going to kick my ass. So anyway, it's really difficult, but I think there's a common sense element to this that we can use.
Yeah, I don't review this question very much. I look at it, but I don't score it. But I've done a lot of, for like Chiquita, I've been in the community trust, I've been in the Longmont Community Foundation. I just want people to answer the question. Just answer the question. And if the answer is, the evidence is that we continue to have return users, or we get very high marks on our surveys, but there is no national best practice that we're aware of, that's totally fine in my mind. But this really belongs in their needs assessment piece in my mind, right? This is continued needs assessment. So I don't score this one, but if I was scoring it, I wouldn't score it very high, right? Because they could, it doesn't always have to be national research data. As long as you keep some track of your own surveys, I know they do that, you can say, the evidence is in how highly rated we are among our ridership, right? But just answer the question. All right, any other thoughts on this one? Because I'm ready to go to number 5. Does the agency evaluate its programs and use data to improve? And that is right here.
So board members, what do you think? How would you evaluate, how would you score this particular question?
I would give this a high score.
So Kimberly?
Initially, it looks strong, but it's not really demonstrating how they're going to use this data for improvement practices. It just shows general satisfaction. So I feel like it's lacking in that, and it would probably be a middle score, just because they're not specific enough in how they're using this to guide their programmatic planning.
Chiquita.
I also want to point out that there are several questions, there are several asks in this paragraph. And so I think we need to be mindful when we're reading this and reading their response that they are responding to what is being asked in the full program evaluation section. Because back to what Eliberto said, We just really want them to answer the question. So at the end of their paragraph, can we truly say that they really answered everything that we asked? So I'm with Kimberly. It was pretty cool how they answered it though, but it wasn't everything.
Brian.
You know, on that point of the question of like, how do you use this? I'm not sure. Do you have a good example of an answer? Because that's a process question in my mind. You know, the common sense answer in my mind is we take a look at the data and we use it to better inform our decisions for the next round of the program. But I can't think of how, you know, are we looking for more of a like, it gets plugged in here and then this person does a thing to it and they pass it over here, and is that what we're looking for?
So I can't, so I've applied to this grant in the past, and this question has been there for a while. So I will talk from past experience as an applicant. So when we were doing circles, we started doing an annual program evaluation, kind of a formative evaluation where we'd ask specifically, are the way that we're running the meetings, are the way that our, you know, are the way that our volunteers working with you helpful? And I would literally, you know, what we learned and gleaned from that program evaluation, we put into this answer. It's like, you know, they wanted, you know, we're changing the program this way. So that's one way to look at it.
So the other thing, so when I look at blah blah blah, that the percentages were up from you know 91 and 86% respectively from the the 2015 report. What would make this stronger is, well, why was that? What the heck did they do? So they did something, or maybe not, but where we would be interested in, all right, so what did you do? How did you use this data, and what changes did you make, or how, and to increase your scores to to 96, 98, and 96%. So that's a jump. And so we're like, okay, you grabbed your data, and how did you look at it? Who in the agency looks at it? How does it get considered? Do you have an evaluation committee of your board? Do you have an evaluator on your program evaluator on your staff? Whatever, but you did something,
right?
Maybe, or
Well,
maybe not. Maybe you just, who
well, no,
knows?
They say it in the last sentence.
That's why we collect evaluation data. Evaluation data isn't just to hopefully, just put on a shelf. It's supposed to mean something. So either how do we keep doing what we really score well at? Did we decide we're getting rid of certain programs? Have we changed up a whole protocol based on, what we're getting back from our participants and the valuation about our services? So that's what would make that stronger. Other than evaluation findings help us understand what's important to our clients and decide on improvement priorities. That's a general statement that doesn't tell us anything. We want to know how they do it. What are some examples?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you could just throw some examples in, this is what we changed between 2015 and 2020, right? That would be a higher score if I was grading this.
Right.
All right, the last question is the historical inequities question. So did the agency describe historical inequities in its program designed to address and the strategy utilized to address them? And did it describe how, so this was in two places, right? Because we put it in two places. So first you go back to right here. Did they describe any historical inequities? I mean, talk about being bilingual. Now, Kimberly, you said it was somewhere else. Where else did you see it? And sometimes you're gonna have to look through the application.
Yeah. So if you scroll down, they kind of talk about the individuals served and how they're at risk. People with mobility limitations are at risk of suffering from isolation. So that's a historic inequity, that they're isolated, and they're designing this program to empower older community members so they're independent and self-sufficient. So I think that paragraph really helps support how they're addressing historic inequities. And then they continue that as well in the assessment information, just to kind of establish the risk. I feel like for those who need transportation but maybe don't have regular access to it.
I mean, and this bolsters Shakita's earlier point, right? We probably need another question before this to help them answer it. And so we will definitely look into it for next year. And then we asked that second part of the question is right here in the evaluation. I mean, it could be inferred from what Kimberly said, because they have this, that they're working in with this population, that they are addressing them, but it's not really clearly stated.
Shakita?
So when we're talking about, so I'm probably really all messed up now about what I'm gonna ask. So when we're asking these questions, so this program was created because of the disparities within this community, and that's why this program was created. So when we're asking about the historical inequities I'm thinking they're talking about the historical inequities within the organization that they've seen amongst the community that they have served, and what have they done to help to resolve those inequities or fill in those gaps. Or are we asking within our community, what are some historical inequities that you have filled in? So for me, I feel like, I don't know, first answer that is which one is it? Because I may be thinking totally off. Anybody? Somebody?
I think that I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I think you pinpointed a great distinction that the organization and the program could serve to alleviate an inequity, societal wide, or the organization could have internal processes and procedures which alleviate internal inequities. And I think it's got to be both. Ultimately, I don't think it has to be either or. Brian?
I've always interpreted this as addressing the larger societal inequities of race discrimination, discrimination against disabilities, people who are populations that have been left out of mainstream efforts. I actually hadn't thought about it as a more kind of internalized question before.
Well, the reason why I asked that is because I don't know if these questions have always been asked. So a lot of times they didn't know that they had inequities within internally, right? And so, yes, they know that they're serving this societal, this community. We all know that, but we want them to address what impact do they have on the inequities within their organization as well, and with the people that they serve directly. So I don't know. I just maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way. I'm looking at it. So,
Well, just in 2021, so the application that you're looking at now, that's the first year we've asked that question. And that was a result of, many months of some deep conversation that the advisory board had around what was happening throughout our world and our city and our community right here. So so that was the first year it was asked, and it really wasn't around an internal. I mean, I think the question really was more public facing versus not versus. We didn't really talk about the internal equities within an organization, and I don't think that's what that question was about. That doesn't mean that we might not want to ask in the future, but I think this was really around, you know, the community that the agency serves.
And I would make an argument if you want to ask that question, it really belongs in the agency section, not the program section, because it's really about what you're talking about is the agency itself.
Thank you.
So it's a hard one. It's a new question. It's a hard one to answer and to look at. I'm not saying it isn't. But and again, it's in each individual board members and how they read this and how they interpret it that determines what you score.
And then it doesn't look like we included any of the logic model information.
Yeah, we didn't include the logic model.
Right.
I'm sorry about that. But I can get their logic.
That question's been removed though, right? We're not asking for them to provide a logic model anymore.
No, there's still a logic model in the application, but now it's going to be in the application, not.
Yeah, it's not a separate document.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, we internalize the application. So I can get their logic model.
Well, I think I want to do it just to check in, Eliberto, if that's okay. So we brought back and again, a couple of examples of applications from the previous year, just to kind of do a walkthrough. I think, you know, some of the board thought that might be helpful as we launch our evaluation process. So I wanted to check in. I'm also looking at the time. So we have about 20 minutes left of the meeting. So I want to see if, because we have the Meals on Wheels application, and I don't know whether you want us to go through that, if that would be helpful, or maybe just finishing up VIA and maybe pulling up, if Eliberto, if you have it handy, to pull up the logic model for VIA and go through that, or have you had enough and gotten what you need out of that and we move on to the site visit? So I just wanted to check in and see what would be most helpful to the board.
Karen?
I just want to say this has been really helpful. It's great to hear that other people struggle too, you know, and I think this is good that, you know, there's no set answer, and it's good to know that, and we just keep plugging along. And, you know, I appreciate Shakita and Deanna saying that too. And it's great. The staff is great, and thanks for putting up with our inequities or whatever.
It's hard. It's not
really hard.
Yeah,
and I'm glad to hear that other people are struggle with it too. So yay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brian?
As someone who has struggled through this process for a number of years, my recollection is that Longmont Meals on Wheels always puts together a great application. So I think it would be worth it if everybody has the temperament just to spend 5 minutes, even if it's quickly, and go through that as another example.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we can focus primarily just on the board side. We don't have to worry about the agency side. I think that's fine. Let me, let's do that. The logic model is going to be different. So I think showing you this logic model doesn't make a lot of sense because it's going to be so different this year. I did find it, but it's just very different. Let me very quickly get the. Can everybody see the Longmont Meals on Wheels application? All right. So let's go straight to and we'll go quickly. But
what the board evaluates, right?
Yeah, what the board evaluates. You know, we'll say they have just 30% of their board is people of color. That's pretty good. All right. Let's go to the board stuff. All right, here you go, program narrative. Here's where we start. And this is kind of just their larger piece. So the first question, again, is about, does it hit one of our priorities? And of course, last year our priorities was access to food, and yeah, it definitely, does hit that piece. This year will be about prioritized activities, so that's a little bit different, but last year is really about food.
Even though it's more than a meal,
It's more than a meal, yes.
if you remember. Some things I remember. It's more than a meal.
Yes. But so question number 2 is, do they do assessments, right? So let's look at their assessment piece. Right, so they instead of looking, I like this answer because, and I'll let the board talk about it too, but you don't always have to have an expensive, huge community need assessment. You can always look at who you serve. Any thoughts from the board on that one?
Or thoughts about how you would rate this? Do you think it's
I would rate high. I think that, yeah, they're just asking their target population, and then they're even training staff to be good listeners and be aware and to assess the needs on a case-by-case basis. So I'd score this one very high.
Then the next question is around best practices, which is the program rationale.
I don't particularly find that this addresses best practices.
right?
All right,
I think it's good information, but
yeah.
So it helps to really establish, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, what would you like them to say in there, for an example?
I would look for a statement like the New England Journal of Medicine has shown that it's seniors who get meals delivered to their home as opposed to being driven to a meal service facility are 75% more likely to continue that service and continue with healthy eating habits. So it would be some comparison against the alternative, I think, is what I would look for as a best practice in this case.
And an organization this large, Meals on Wheels, is pretty big. I'm assuming they've done some research throughout the country. So yeah, that's what I would look for. Is like. Then the next question is, does it clearly state how it reaches and serves its target population? Now, first, we need to know what it's, you look up here to who the target population is, right? So is older people with disabilities who are unable to leave their homes. So that's who that's their population. They're looking for folks that are older and can't leave their homes or struggle to prepare meals for themselves. And then once you know that, you can look down at, there you go.
I really love how plainly they described their target population. It's super easy to understand who they're targeting. And this second paragraph under outreach and engagement really gives a nice narrative of how they're using feedback to create new programs or improve the programs that they have. So it's not exactly the outreach, it's almost more program evaluation oriented, but it does paint a good picture.
Well, that last sentence was the special touch.
It's more than a meal.
More than a meal. See you. I remember
And they even said older Longmonters.
that.
There you go. Question 5 is about evaluation, which is great. The next-
Hey, can I comment on, I think back to Karen's question earlier about the best practice model. I think they start to answer the best practice model in this, where it's more than a meal. So because you get a meal and you get a connection, with another human being and someone checking on you. And I think that could be what they describe in their best practice model, just as an example. That food is good. You need food, but that more than a meal model, and I'm sure there is data that talks about that I think would have been a good answer to their best practice question.
So this is a question around evaluation.
So I think this is another area where it's that general question, kind of or general response, like what we talked with VIA. So they basically track the numbers, and the information is analyzed and addressed as soon as possible. That doesn't give us a lot of information about how they do that, who does that, what have been some of the changes and modifications that they have made. Does it go back to the board and they do that and as part of their planning? I don't know. It's just a general statement that could be stronger in terms of how and some examples of what they have been able to do.
I would say it's a great prompt for interview question during this hearings.
Right.
For board members to say, hey, so you talk about this, so can you give us some examples of what you do? And the final question goes back up. It's around the equity question.
And Eliberto, I think to that point, I meant to make it earlier. So when we all we do a review of the applications before, well, hopefully we try before we have our hearing with the agency. And so it's also, so sometimes I don't score a particular area because I have a question and I want to ask the question during the hearing. And so that's when I will either score it, or I might change my score based on what I hear in that hearing process. Sorry, go ahead, Eliberto, sorry.
So no, this is a section where they would answer about, are they addressing, I think this goes to Chiquita's point. What I'm reading is that this is more internal. Not that they're not doing the external, but that last paragraph is primarily internal work.
Kimberly.
I think they do a great job of addressing the systemic biases against older adults in that second paragraph before they address the staff diversity and inclusion trainings. I think they do actually do a good job here of historical inequities again against older adults.
So they kind of do both, internal and external.
It seems to me that if you're doing it internally, all these trainings they reference, implicit bias assessments, that sort of thing, then necessarily, since those folks are going to be providing the service, that will bleed out into your outer facing activities. So I'd rather see some real clear, concrete activities internally that are helping address inequities and thinking about it and talking about it. Because I know that will result in an outward facing one, rather than an academic answer talking about the historical societal underpinnings and issues. And so I think that's why I say that it's really both. But yeah, so I think it's a good answer that they have.
And then to answer for that question, I also want to look at their evaluation. I know we looked at it before. And again, it might just be an issue of being reminded of that question, and they can throw in a sentence around or two around what they mentioned earlier.
So anything else on Meals on Wheels?
All right.
Should we fund them?
We'll let the score decide. That's
Yeah.
Okay, we ready to move on?
I hope this was helpful.
It was. Thank you, Alberto and Karen. Okay, next item, site visit. That's me, Chiquita TLC Learning Center.
Was I there in spirit, Graham? Because
You were not there, but you were listed on the agenda, so I felt obligated to not leave you out.
like, oh Lord, I didn't.
Did you
Oh, maybe
forget? No,
I don't know what happened. To be honest with you, I was like, maybe my spirit was there. I don't know.
yeah, no worries.
So maybe were you even assigned to that? Maybe we just didn't take, and maybe that was a carryover from a previous.
I don't
think-
remember
I
Graham and I
remember.
was together on that. I've already had like 3 or 4.
Okay, so that was probably just,
A typo. I think
Art-
it was Brian that we were trying to get
okay.
scheduled for that. Yeah.
Thank you, because I was so confused. I was like, why is my name?
but what we know is Graham and Eliberto did that site visit. So
we did.
let's hear about it.
Okay. Do you want to start it, Alberto?
Well, yeah, I'll start. So we've had this issue with a couple of agencies. I didn't really get to do a desk audit because they didn't get the email or something. So we're still working on that with a couple of agencies. Same thing happened with Boulder Valley Women's Health. Didn't get the email, or it was in the junk mail. So, but we had scheduled the meeting, so let's just do it. As for Brian, not Brian, Graham. Graham will talk about this. I think the big takeaway for me was one, I learned that CCAP is paying more, which is always a good thing. And CCAP is that Colorado
Child Care Assistance Program.
Right. So that was good to hear. But two, the other big takeaway for me was just how challenging it is to retain staff. I mean, what a big struggle they're having. So, those are my 2 big takeaways, and I'll let Graham, do his.
Okay. So this organization, TLC, has been around since 1956, and they do primarily 2 things. One is education services, and the second thing is therapy assistance for young folks with disability or occupational developmental challenges. And so they have a highly specialized staff and program that assist with those folks. Let's see, they also provide grants or scholarships to participants if they're unable to pay. And to the point of the CCAP funding, that's a government source of funding that furnishes 50% of their education services wing. But if you're a family with a child that needs the services, it's actually, there's a bit of a cliff in terms of your ability to qualify. So you might qualify until you get a 10% raise at work, and then all of a sudden you're disqualified, or you take a semester off of school and all of a sudden you're disqualified. And so one of the interesting things that TLC tries to do, and then in particular with the Longmont funding, is to subsidize or provide some gap funding there to those folks that need the services. So it sounds like they're putting Longmont money to good use in that regard. See, their biggest challenge is recruiting and retention of staff. They're currently on their website, you can see that they're trying to recruit. And a lot of the struggle there is in terms of professional development salaries, being able to compete with other organizations. So Matt, who's clearly a very hard worker over there, talked about how Smuckers, for example, is paying $23 an hour for a third shift staff to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Now, in contrast, their organization is hiring $28 an hour for a very specialized certified staff member to assist in these therapies. That has all sorts of other implications like high stress, high emotional involvement. And so to contrast the skill and sort of psychological engagement of those two career paths, it seems inequitable. Like it makes it hard for him and organizations like his to compete and retain good staff. So he had a lot to say about that challenge. Anyway, that challenge he doesn't come to the city of Longmont for, because as he said, it's not really a sexy thing to ask for money for, to pay their staff more, or to subsidize a salary, and rather they come to us to help with the scholarship and the grant funding for participants. 6 of the 42 staff are bilingual. They work hard at board diversity, so much so that they try to provide childcare because they want to not exclude potential board members that can't afford childcare. And they also try to provide food because it's usually an evening time. Anyway, and they think about what are the obstacles to a diverse board, and they try to overcome them with practical activities. So that was very encouraging for me to hear. They say the city of Longmont, he says the city of Longmont comparatively is better than most in terms of its support of early childhood education, and reference particularly the Bright Eyes or Early Childhood Development Board or group. So I think we get, as a city, high marks for being comparatively better in supporting those activities. See if I can navigate through my chicken scratch here. They do 2 major fundraisers and they have events for scholarships. So they don't just rely on government funding and grants. They do proactively engage the community in fundraising efforts. Let's see. I did notice in the report that Eliberto gave about last year, we funded them in 2021, $37,500 in the category of education and skill building. And yeah, I think that was it. Any questions? Cool.
Oh.
Karen.
So did they talk about their strategy for recruitment and retention and increasing pay?
Eliberto, did you hear a solution there? I didn't really. I think it was.
No.
I mean, I think
I think
it's
so.
wide in the industry, but I just didn't know whether.
Yeah, Karen, I think the solution, or at least a temporary or something, is looking at all the money that council's throwing at early childhood.
But that's one time.
I know, yeah, but
Yeah.
they want to take advantage of that, whether that
Yeah.
be professional
Okay.
development or whatever, that definitely keeping an eye on that money.
Okay, got it.
I think Chiquita has her hand up too.
First of all, I want to say, Graham, we did a good job. That's all. No,
Nice.
no. I just have one question, and the one question is, so you said there's 42 staff members now. What is it normally? How many staff?
I
Do you know?
don't know. I know that he would hire 2 people today if he could find they're qualified to help with the child therapies and education. But no, I don't know what the ideal staff level would be or what it was pre-pandemic. Sounds like, the pandemic, he lost some staff. So. Because he feels
So
like the fact that the educational environment has increased danger and restriction has reduced the ability to retain staff. That was definitely a component.
So when he applied in 2020 for 2021, he had 42 staff.
So I guess it's mostly not keeping up with an increase in demand. I think our population's growing and. Mhm. Deanna?
So I was just going to say, I really love that they are really cognizant of providing childcare and food for diversifying their board. And this is not really germane to this discussion, but I don't know if we've ever thought about for our board, if there's a way. I mean, it would be great to do some things to diversify our recruitment for our board. And I don't know if the lack of childcare or food precludes some people from applying that might otherwise apply to our board, but maybe at some point we could talk about that. I mean, I understand it's a city, so there's not a lot of money to provide those services, but there may be some community partners that we don't have sort of conflicts with that we could work with for donations or something. I don't know. And I know that isn't on the agenda tonight. It just struck me as we were talking about their board policies that might be something that we consider trying to do to diversify our boards for the city too.
Make it rain, Karen.
Well, I think it's a good topic. And Eric, if you could just make note of that so that we get that on are we meeting in October? But I mean, because we will be recruiting for year end for board members. So I think certainly that's something we can look at and consider, Deanna, and then I think just really how do we reach out and try to generate interest and applicants for this board? Because council obviously selects the members, but if they had a broader pool from which to choose, that certainly helps, I would think. So I think it's a great point that you bring up. And if we continue to meet virtually, then we don't have to, we do have food money. It's usually to provide meals for the board when we're doing our public hearings, our hearings for our agency funding. But if we don't do that, there's money we're saving we could use elsewhere, FYI, for food.
Okay, any other business? If not, it sounds like, Karen Phillips.
When is this gonna all start happening? The
So I
meetings
think,
and the stuff.
yeah, I think we shared that with you, but we can email it. I know Erica has put together a timeline. I'm gonna get started right away on getting folks into their accounts. Like I emailed a few of you about this. I will work on that. If you cannot access your EC impact, I have not, again, it was due today. I have not assigned. I got to figure out which ones I need to assign. Erica's working on that, and I can assign them to you all for review. I got to update, of course, the application with what we went over tonight. I think that'll take me about a week And then hopefully by the end of next week, you guys will have them, you'll have access to them. And Erica, when do we start our meetings? I know that you created it.
Did you ask Erica?
Yeah, or do you know, Karen?
I believe it's October 4th.
Okay. So you'll have time to review. I'll get on it pretty quickly and get all that stuff to you all.
I was just curious. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
So that's our first hearing, and I'd love for you to at least have 2 weeks. We're not sure how many I think I heard we have 54 applications,
No,
but I don't know how
no,
many of those.
no. We
Oh.
Erica has an update.
Oh, okay, good.
So update 40. We have 40
Which is-
agencies. Yep.
Same as last year.
So about the same as last year.
Yeah.
That's still a lot. So just saying. But it's not 54. Yeah.
So yes, I will do my best to get it to you all. If I can get it sooner, I'll get it sooner to give you time. So
All right, I'll entertain a motion to close. There's one.
I second.
Very good. All in favor.
Aye.
Have a good night, everyone.